After years of dealing with our HOA's ridiculous control, they finally pushed me too far. This time, they jacked up my fees just because I had a few cars parked in my own driveway. What they didn't realize, though, was that I'd been quietly snatching up houses in our neighborhood for years. And now it was time to show Cheryl, the HOA president who practically lives for power trips, who really runs this place. But the real question was, would she back down gracefully once I revealed what I'd been up to? Hey there, welcome to my channel. If you're into stories about power-hungry Cheryls and outrageous HOA drama, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Listen, I never set out to start trouble with the HOA. Honestly, that was the last thing I wanted. But everything changed last Tuesday morning when I spotted that bright orange notice taped right to my front door. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just a disagreement anymore. This was war. My hands trembled a bit as I read it. Immediate increase to my HOA fees. $500 more. Every single month. Violation. Excessive vehicles on the property. 3 cars. That's what they were making a fuss over. My work truck, essential for my construction gigs. My wife's SUV. She works hospital night shifts. And the used Honda we bought as a birthday gift for our daughter who just turned 16. Just 3 everyday vehicles, sitting in our own driveway like any normal family would have. I watched from the kitchen window as Cheryl Wallace, our ever-vigilant HOA president, strutted by during her usual morning patrol, clipboard in one hand, measuring tape in the other. She paused at my driveway, whipped out her phone, and started snapping pictures. Again. That was the 3rd time this week. She's out there again, my wife Emily called from the living room. Maybe we should just move the Honda into the garage? She asked. Nope, I replied, pouring myself a cup of coffee. We're not going to hide our daughter's car like we've done something wrong. Our garage? It's packed. Emily stores her medical gear in there, and I've got all my tools and equipment for work. We'd explained this clearly at the last HOA meeting, and I couldn't stop replaying that meeting in my head. The way Cheryl smirked while I tried to explain our situation. Didn't even bother to look up from her phone when she said, "Rules are rules, Mr. Carter. Maybe if you can't afford proper garage storage, this neighborhood isn't for you." What Cheryl didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I'd been quietly buying up properties in our development for a while now. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't just a while. It had been 5 solid years of buying through my real estate investment company. Every time a house hit the market, I scooped it up under a different LLC name. At first, it was just a smart way to invest. But now it felt personal. I stepped outside to grab the mail, taking my time on purpose. Cheryl pretended to be checking Mrs. Whitaker's rose bushes, but I could feel her eyes on me. Poor Mrs. Whitaker got fined last month because her roses were too vibrant. Apparently, they didn't match the color harmony of the neighborhood. Right then, my phone buzzed. A text from my lawyer. Property closing complete. You now own 67% of the development. I grinned and slid the phone back into my pocket, just as Cheryl came power walking toward me, clutching her pink clipboard like it was some kind of badge. "Mr. Carter," she called, voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I trust you saw the notice regarding your vehicle violation?" "I did, Cheryl," I said coolly, "and I've got a few questions about how exactly the board came up with that fee increase." She waved a hand like it was no big deal. "The board has full authority to apply fees as needed. If you came to more meetings, you'd probably understand how it all works." Her smile was all teeth, no warmth. Little did she know I'd been involved in every single meeting for the past 5 years, just not in person. I had proxy reps attend through the other properties I owned, and I'd kept receipts on everything. Every time Cheryl enforced rules selectively, every sketchy fee, every little abuse of power. As she turned to walk away, her designer heels clicking on the pavement, she tossed one last comment over her shoulder. "Oh, and there's an emergency board meeting tonight. 7 p.m. sharp. We'll be talking about some new measures for problem properties. I watched her disappear around the corner, then pulled out my phone and shot off a text to my lawyer. Time to get those documents ready. Cheryl was making her move tonight. That much was clear. Just as my daughter pulled into the driveway, I caught sight of Cheryl stopping again, phone in hand, snapping even more pictures. My blood started to boil, but I took a deep breath and kept it together. This night was going to change everything in our neighborhood. I just had to stay focused. But first, there were a few calls I needed to make. Back inside, I spread out the property maps across my desk. Each lot was highlighted, labeled, and coded with care, the result of 5 years of slow, quiet strategy. Years of documenting everything, collecting evidence, and watching Cheryl's little empire of HOA tyranny grow unchecked. What she didn't realize was that going after my family wasn't her worst mistake. It was underestimating the man who'd been planning her downfall piece by piece. Just then, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Whitaker from across the street, her voice shaky with tears. Another violation notice. I listened quietly as she explained, nodding to myself, and my eyes drifted over to the old photo on the wall. My dad, standing proudly in front of his first house. That was before the HOA pushed him out decades ago, forced to sell at a loss because of endless harassment. That photo reminded me why I started this in the first place. I checked my watch. 6 hours to go until the big meeting. Cheryl wanted to go to war over a few parked cars. She had no idea the storm she was walking into. Later that evening, I walked into the community center, and the tension hit me right away. Every seat was packed. Folks I'd known for years were crammed shoulder to shoulder, quietly whispering to each other. Cheryl had gone all out this time. She even brought in a professional photographer. Seriously, just to take pictures of my driveway from different angles? Trying to make 3 average cars look like some kind of used car dealership. I'm so excited, I'm so excited, I'm so excited, I'm so excited. I could barely hold it in. Cheryl tapped her glittery pink gavel against the podium. Let's begin, she said with her usual flair. She'd scheduled this emergency meeting on a Tuesday night, no doubt banking on the fact that most working families wouldn't be able to make it. But I was there, quiet, calm, sitting in the back row, letting her run her mouth. As you can see from these professionally captured photographs, she began, clicking through a flashy PowerPoint. Mr. Carter's property has essentially turned into a used car lot. A few of her loyal fan club, the ones who still had Christmas lights up in March, let out some dramatic gasps. I scanned the room and caught Mrs. Patel rolling her eyes. She's in her 70s, and just last month she got slapped with a fine because her grandson parked in her driveway while helping fix her roof. Then there was Mr. Nguyen, the science teacher from the high school, scribbling away in his notebook like he was documenting a crime scene. He'd gotten a notice during the last snowstorm for having his car half an inch over the edge of the driveway. Cheryl clicked to the next slide, a close-up shot of my daughter's car. This vehicle has been parked in the same position for over 48 hours, she announced. She left out the small detail that my daughter was home from college for the weekend. The whole presentation dragged on. Charts, claims about falling property values, anonymous complaints, probably just Cheryl and her book club, and even weather reports about snow drifting around parked cars. Then she pulled out a huge binder, acting like she'd cracked some criminal conspiracy. I've kept detailed records of every vehicle entering and leaving Mr. Carter's residence over the past 3 months. My eyebrows shot up. She'd been tracking us. Our movements. A few folks in the room squirmed in their seats. That's when Emily Bell, my next-door neighbor, stood up. Cheryl, don't you think this is going a bit too far? She asked. They're just normal cars in a normal driveway. Cheryl's face turned a shade of red I hadn't seen before. You're out of order. You've not been recognized by the chair, she barked. Then her husband, Frank, started walking around the room, passing out copies of a brand new proposed bylaw. One that would limit every household to just 2 vehicles and require that all cars be parked in garages only. The absurdity of it hit me like a punchline. I nearly laughed right there. Cheryl didn't waste time. We'll now move to vote on the proposed vehicle restrictions and the accompanying fee increases, she said, breezing right past any chance for questions or discussion. All in favor? That was my moment. I stood up slowly, tugging my tie straight. Point of order, Madam President, I said clearly. Cheryl narrowed her eyes, glaring at me over her glasses. You're not recognized, Mr. Carter. Actually, I said, reaching into my folder, you'll want to hear this. According to HOA bylaw section 7-3, I began, loud enough for everyone to hear. Any property owner has the right to raise a point of order if they believe the voting process is being mishandled. The room instantly went quiet. I saw Cheryl's fingers tighten around the podium, her polished nails digging in like she was trying to hold on to control with sheer willpower. Before we jump into any vote, I continued, stepping slowly toward the front, each step echoing on the linoleum floor. I think it's important we all take a moment to look at who actually owns what in this community. You could have heard a pin drop? For the past 5 years, I said, unfolding a large map, a company called Sunrise Properties has been steadily buying homes in this development. Cheryl's face started to drain of color. She knew what was coming. And as the CEO of Sunrise Properties, I added, turning to the crowd and making eye contact with every board member one by one, I thought it might be relevant for you all to know exactly who holds the majority of this HOA. I paused deliberately, then looked right at Cheryl. But hey, maybe we can go over that after we talk about your little hobby of surveillance and tracking residents. A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. Phones started popping up. Folks were recording now. Cheryl reached for her water bottle with a shaky hand, but ended up knocking it over, along with her glittery little gavel. Frank, her husband, rushed up to her side, leaning in to whisper something urgent in her ear. I could see it in her eyes. That moment of realization, she finally knew who she'd been messing with all this time. The room was dead silent again as I stood tall. My heart was pounding in my chest, but my voice stayed calm. Cheryl's usual smug grin was nowhere to be seen as I popped open my leather briefcase and pulled out a stack of neatly organized paperwork. Before we vote on any new fees, I said, there's something I think you all deserve to see. I started laying out property deed after property deed on the table at the front of the room. Each one represented another piece of the plan I'd been quietly building for half a decade. Gasps and whispers rippled through the room as I lined them up, clean and deliberate. For the last 5 years, I said, my voice steady, I've watched this HOA ignore major issues, busted sidewalks, broken lights, while nitpicking good folks over the smallest things. I turned to the crowd. Mrs. Whitaker, 82 years old, got fined because her flower pot was 1 inch too tall. Meanwhile, Cheryl's friend Deborah? Bright purple fence. Never got so much as a warning. Cheryl's face flushed crimson. I'm sorry, that's not true, she stammered. I enforce the rules fairly. But as she tried to defend herself, her hand shook so bad, she spilled water down the front of her designer blouse. I tapped a button on the laptop, hooked up to the meeting room's big screen. Here's Cheryl measuring my lawn at 3 a.m. last Tuesday, I said, as security footage played. There was no mistaking her. Pajamas, flashlight, tape measure in hand, gasps. And here's her walking past the Carter's property, I added, flipping to the next clip, completely ignoring their violations, right after they hired her son's landscaping company. The murmurs were louder now. I could see heads nodding. People were connecting the dots, remembering their own run-ins, their own unfair warnings. But the most important thing I've discovered, I said, lifting the stack of deeds back up, is that through Sunrise Properties, I now legally own 67% of the homes in this development. I let that sit. Which means, I said slowly, I'm the majority stakeholder in this HOA. Cheryl shot to her feet, knocking her chair to the floor. You can't do that. That's not allowed, she squeaked, her voice cracking with panic. I gave her a calm smile. Actually, I can, and I did. I've had 3 separate law firms go over every purchase, every document. It's all above board. I held up my phone, speaker on. A voice came through clearly. We also have 32 signed complaints from residents detailing harassment, selective rule enforcement, and unexplained fee increases. That was the final spark. Mrs. Whitaker stood up, her voice shaking with emotion. Last winter, they fined me $200 for not shoveling my walkway in time, she said. I was in the hospital with pneumonia. More people stood up, one after another, sharing their own stories. Cheryl tried to bang her gavel to restore order, but nobody cared. She'd lost the room. I moved to dissolve the current HOA board, I said, raising my voice above the noise. Effective immediately, we'll hold fresh elections, real ones, with term limits, transparency, and no more shady conflicts of interest. No more 3 a.m. grass measurements, someone shouted. Frank Chen, 2 doors down, stood up and raised his hand. I second that motion, he said. All around the room, hands started going up. One by one, Cheryl snatched her designer purse and made a beeline for the door. This meeting is adjourned, she yelled over her shoulder. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. I didn't raise my voice. I just stayed right where I was, calm and steady. Actually, I said, per HOA bylaws, Section 7.3 to be exact, adjourning a meeting requires a majority vote. I looked around the room, then back at the stack of property deeds still spread across the table. And I don't think you have that majority anymore, Cheryl. She stopped cold, hand resting on the doorknob like it had just dawned on her that she wasn't in charge anymore. 20 years of micromanaging this neighborhood. Gone. And I wasn't done. Now, I said, flipping open another folder, let's talk about those pool renovation fees from last summer. You know, the $50,000 that vanished even though the pool still leaks and the tiles are falling off. I held up some documents. Got some bank records you'll find real interesting. Cheryl slumped against the wall, color completely drained from her face. She hadn't even noticed the local news van pulling into the parking lot. Yeah, I'd invited them. Told them it was a, quote, community reorganization meeting. The next few hours would reshape this neighborhood from the ground up. But first, it was time to unbox years' worth of Cheryl's secrets. And lucky for everyone in that room, I had receipts, all of them. That Monday morning, I walked into my lawyer's office, coffee in hand, ready for the next step. I was greeted by 20 angry voicemails from Cheryl, who'd clearly spent her weekend discovering the truth about Sunrise Properties. She was furious, threatening lawsuits, accusing me of trying to stage a secret takeover. I couldn't help but smile. She wasn't just angry anymore, she was scared. That evening, she went door to door trying to stir up panic, telling neighbors I was turning the place into some giant parking lot for my car collection. Some folks bought it, especially after she flashed around some fake-looking paperwork linking me to shady developers. But I wasn't about to let her spin the narrative. My security cameras caught her trespassing on my property at midnight, getting close-up shots of my license plates, and the next day, she filed a lawsuit. She accused me of violating HOA rules by purchasing properties under different LLCs, and even tried to get an emergency court order to strip me of my voting rights. That's when the trap snapped shut. My lawyer stood up in court and laid out everything, piece by piece. We had detailed records from every HOA meeting over the last 5 years. Video clips of Cheryl letting her buddies off the hook while hitting others with absurd fines. Copies of checks that showed she used HOA funds to pay for a backyard renovation at her own house. And then came the emails. Cheryl, bragging about how she used her position to keep out the wrong kind of people. The judge's expression changed with each new piece of evidence. When we played the footage of her measuring my grass with a ruler at 3 a.m., taking pictures of my daughter's parked car, and leaving threatening notes on neighbors' doors, her lawyer visibly started to sweat. And then we hit them with the kicker: documents showing she altered official records to erase unpaid dues owed by her closest friends. We brought in residents who testified. People Cheryl had bullied into going along with unfair rule changes. Folks who admitted they were scared to speak up until now. They told the court how Cheryl targeted homeowners she didn't like and even joked about using HOA fines to pay for her annual trips to Hawaii. Then came the bombshell. We pulled up one of Cheryl's old social media posts. She was lounging by a resort pool in Maui, cocktail in hand, captioning it, "Big thanks to my rule-breaking neighbors for funding this trip. Keep those violations coming." You could feel the entire courtroom shift. Cheryl tried to play it off, said she was just doing her job. That's when we played the audio from last month's meeting. Her voice screaming at Mrs. Whitaker, our 75-year-old neighbor, because her bird feeder was 2 inches too low. That was the breaking point. Cheryl lost it. She stood up, jabbing her finger in my direction. "He's trying to destroy everything. You have no idea what kind of people will move in here if we don't have strict rules. He probably wants to let everyone just park wherever they want." The judge didn't even flinch. Cheryl's case? Dismissed. But that wasn't all. The judge ordered a full audit of the HOA's finances. As I stepped out of the courthouse, my phone lit up with texts. Neighbors letting me know Cheryl had just sent out a mass email announcing her immediate resignation. Of course, she tried to make herself the victim, blaming, quote, "powerful corporate interests" for pushing her out. I watched her storm toward her car, typing furiously on her phone, probably already planning her next move. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't over. But neither was I. Cheryl still had a handful of loyal supporters in the neighborhood, and I knew better than to think she'd go down quietly. Admitting defeat? Not her style. But for now, I had everything I needed. Solid proof of her abuse of power and the legal authority to finally start making real changes. Then came the morning of our final court hearing, and with it, a surprise. I opened the blinds and saw them, news vans. A whole fleet of them parked outside my house. Cheryl had apparently called every local outlet, thinking the media spotlight would pressure me into backing down. But what she didn't realize was that she just handed me the perfect platform. I adjusted my tie, grabbed my folders, and walked straight up to the cameras with a smile. "Good morning," I said. "I'm Daniel Carter, and I've got something I'd really like to show you." I held up the color-coded spreadsheets my accountant and I had worked on for weeks. Years of questionable HOA spending laid out in full view. Cheryl had been funneling HOA funds into pet projects that just so happened to benefit her closest friends, while single parents and longtime residents were hit with the steepest violation fines. One reporter actually gasped when I showed security footage of Cheryl sneaking around my yard at 3 a.m., measuring my grass. All while her own yard looked like it hadn't seen a rulebook in years. Inside the courtroom, I spotted Cheryl sitting with her pricey attorney, wearing that fake pearl necklace she always wore like it meant something. Her usual smug grin was firmly in place, but it didn't last. Once our lawyer started laying out the evidence, the color drained from her face fast. We showed pictures of her house breaking every rule she claimed to enforce. Her mailbox painted bright purple, her yard completely overgrown, her son's 4 cars parked on the street like it was a dealership. The judge leaned in when we presented screenshots from a private Facebook group Cheryl had been running. There she was, bragging about targeting certain families. "Let's see how long the Carters last with these new fees," she wrote. "Maybe they'll finally move and sell to someone more suitable." Cheryl jumped up to object, but she froze in place when we played a recording from the neighborhood pool party just the week before. Clear as day, her voice echoed through the courtroom. Of course I make up violations. How else are we supposed to control who lives here? That was the last straw. The judge slammed the gavel down. Not only was Cheryl permanently removed from the HOA board, but she was ordered to pay back every unfair fee she'd ever issued, totaling $147,892. The look on her face when she heard that number? Better than any revenge I could have dreamed up. With my majority ownership, I led the charge to create a new HOA, one that actually served the people living here. We held elections and voted in 5 new board members from different parts of the neighborhood. Mrs. Patel, who Cheryl once fined for cooking ethnic food. Mr. Nguyen, whose garden was labeled too exotic. Things changed fast. Kids could finally shoot hoops in their driveways without being fined. Families could grow tomatoes instead of just planting roses. And if you had 3 cars, no problem, as long as they fit on your property. 3 weeks later, I looked out my window and watched Cheryl's moving truck pull in. She sent out one last letter to the whole neighborhood, claiming she was relocating to a better community with higher standards. Nobody missed the irony when we saw a parking ticket from her new HOA stuck right to her windshield as she drove away. That night, my daughter parked her car in the driveway, right next to my work truck and my wife's SUV. I went outside and posted the new sign we'd all voted for together. Welcome to Carter Hills, where good neighbors make great neighborhoods. The very next morning, I got an unexpected call. A TV producer had seen the news stories and wanted to make a documentary about how we turned our HOA around. I looked outside. Kids were playing in their yards, neighbors were chatting over garden fences, and there was peace again. Somewhere, Cheryl was probably watching it all from her new house, the one where she's only allowed 1 car in the driveway. And the cherry on top? Property values in our neighborhood went up 15% in the first month after she left. Turns out, people really do prefer living in a place where they're respected, not ruled by fear. A few of Cheryl's old inner circle even came by to apologize. They admitted they'd only supported her because they were afraid they'd be her next target. We still have an HOA, but now it protects the community instead of policing it. Every month, we use the dues for things that matter: fixing the pool, upgrading the playground, helping elderly neighbors with home repairs. We even built a little community garden right where Cheryl used to take photos of violations. As I filed away the last court document in my office, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Cheryl's new neighborhood watch group. They wanted advice on how to deal with their out-of-control HOA president. I leaned back in my chair, looked out at my neighborhood, and smiled. Because sometimes the best kind of revenge is showing other folks how to stand up for themselves.